is your insight and analysis?
That's what I'm saying. What is the reason?
Yes.
I mean, Dr. Saab talked about 5 or 6 hypotheses and he negated all of them. I think I partly agree with him, but I think partly those hypotheses, the security concern and the garrison state and the external factors and the foreign aid, all of these factors also played during those regimes when we had high growth. But the important thing that we have to understand is, I think it's a fact that during democratic dispensations, our growths go down. And during dictatorships, for whatever reasons, external, internal, our growths have been high. And there are very simple explanations to that. The reasons are that when you have a dictatorship, first of all, a dictator, has complete powers compared to a democratic dispensation. He is the prime minister, he is the president, he is the chief minister, everything he has. And then usually they have compliant judiciary also, and the bureaucracy is also subservient, so they are able to do a lot of things. That's number one. Secondly, when a political government comes in, they come with the votes. And unfortunately, the problem with democracy is that somebody said that you will never have good democracy unless people are able to choose wisely.
So in other words,
so
there was a time when they tried to put a condition for those who are elected to be at least graduates. I think we should have a similar condition for voters. You need to be at least a graduate to vote. Huh?
I'm coming to this. This is superficial. You see, the problem is that when somebody gets elected like Nawaz Sharif or Benazir or even Bhutto, he is elected by the MNAs, by MPAs. So he has to please them. Now, he doesn't have the choice to bring experts like Dr. Saab or like, other experts like,
Asad Saab, that's a very interesting point you have raised. I'd like to come back to that, but, okay, let's see what the connection that has been made.
Let me just complete this point. I mean, that is a big advantage that a dictator has because he's only looking at delivery. There's nobody, he doesn't have to go to the people. And he can appoint people on merit and then, therefore, he's able to deliver. Okay. Whereas Nawaz Sharif has to appoint his loyalists or people, who have elected him or, Benazir or, other people. And so, there are inherent limitations of democracy.
Yes, I
Unfortunately, our, democratic leaders are not delivery focused. They are, as Dr. Saab said, they are in the business of patronage. And patronage is part of our society. So, I mean, the system, I mean, I have a lot of things I can go on and explain to you.
At the risk of belaboring the point a little more, I do understand your frustration and I agree with you, and I think what you've pointed out, you've made a very relevant connect as to what Dr. Saab was pointing to. Not only the person who has had the head of the office in a democratic rule does practice politics of patronage, but it is almost like a catch-22 because he has to rely on the infrastructure behind him. Coming to you, Asim Saab, I understand that one of the solutions presented to shake this inertia, to sort of take us out of this limbo, is often a public-private partnership. It is often suggested that, okay, let's not try the blame game strategy, let's try to bring them on the same table, let's adapt the best practices from both the worlds and try to bring them together. How is that going to work? Do you think that is a viable solution for institutions that we may refer to as white elephants, or what Dr. Saab has pointed out requires reforms?
I think the most critical thing in any organization, or whether it's a government department, the government itself, is actually the governance structure as such. And I looked at the education department website of the UK government and the health department, and in every sphere of operations of a government, there are codes that are applied for good governance. And a code of corporate governance, like we have implemented for companies over here, is something that is really being implemented across organizations at government level, at city council level. And these set out several parameters. They talk about having strategic leadership that sets goals and champions visions and strategy. It has accountability that drives up standards of service delivery. It has people with the right skill sets, structures that reinforce clearly defined roles and responsibilities, compliance with statutory and contractual requirements, and evaluation to monitor and improve quality of service and governance. Now, I think the most critical thing in any organization or any department is to have this accountability, transparency, and good leadership. And, you know, if the Prime Minister can appoint heads of various state-owned entities, you know, I think they do also have power to make sure that there is a process put in place to get the best person through an independent process. And I think really, you know, implementing these governance standards across the board, across organizations, is critical in order to make our institutions stronger. Because what happens is whenever there's a flip-flop of change in government, whether it's between democratic setups and you know, democracies tend to find themselves vulnerable because they've got you know, the judiciary looking over, the military looking over, and you know, they are sort of nervous about the decisions that they're going to make because they might just end up having to go to vote at a very short notice. It's important that the state institutions are structured and operate so that they are able to hold everything together.
Right.
And I think that was the theme of what Dr. Saab was also trying to say. We must have governance structures in place that enable us to operate on a consistent basis, that enable us to, you know, grow as a country, have consistency in policies. Why is it that dictatorships see strong periods of growth? Because there is consistency in policies that are being implemented. And it's a complete reversal in case of democracies where they feel, you know, they find themselves vulnerable.
If I can probe on that consistency of policy a little more, in every regime, be it a military regime or be it a democratically elected government, we do see that there are certain clusters of industry that perform better. Like if you look at the Musharraf era, you saw a boom in banking. There was consumer banking that took off. Dr. Saab can expand more upon that. And of course, you saw that the coming of ushering out of telcos, the opening up of media, certain industries, the textile have always been called the blue-eyed industries of Pakistan. So do you feel that certain clusters leverage more power with the policy makers and therefore prosper?
I think, you know, it really depends on what's happening in the world around you as well. So, you know, the telecom sector had to be opened up. The world was changing, and good policies were put in place during the Musharraf era. You had a good central bank, a fantastic governor sitting over there, and you had a banker who was the finance minister. So they understood the banking sector better, and they were able to bring in reforms over there. So you know, with the present government, they always believe in putting up strong infrastructure, and you've seen whether it's making sure that there's enough electricity being added onto the grid, or whether it's having terminals that are being put in place. So all governments have their imperatives and focus areas which they pursue.
So we can perhaps all agree that what happens with every regime is that the order of these priorities gets shuffled. But may I throw this back to Shabbar Saab, your favorite subject? We were just mentioning about the economic policies and the prosperity we all experienced during Musharraf Saab's 8 years, but many call that a bubble and only eyewash and a perceptual game. What is your take on that? Did governance actually improve in that time?
I was just in the break, I was discussing with Mr. Isha Saab, there is a manner of governance in Pakistan where you work on a traditional Anglo-Saxon system of ministries with the divisions and people who are selected from the bureaucracy. My personal opinion is that you need a very effective technocratic regulator in every relevant ministry to actually run the business, to provide the policy framework and to provide technical input on that. The best part of the Musharraf government, I would say, irrespective of the result, is that in the Musharraf regime, these regulators were formed. In my view, they were performing reasonably independently, reasonably better. They were better placed. For example, I will give you the example of State Bank of Pakistan at that time, SCCP at that time, FBR at that time, NEPRA, PEMRA, CCP, Competition Commission of Pakistan. So that and the regulators and if you ask all the people in the hall, that the people who were the regulators at that time, nobody had any doubt on those facilities. So the ministries who are, I will not say who are a cause of the problem, were actually only implementer, but at least on the policy side, we were not making errors.
Right.
So that was the, I would say that was
combination
that was
worked.
the biggest credit of Mr. Musharraf. I will give you one example. For
So
example,
you feel all things being equal, that combination really
yes,
clicked.
and
right?
Dr. Saab has identified 44. I would bring it
24.
34. I would bring it down to only 10.
Okay.
I would even like bring it down
More
to 5.
doable, but I'm sure you've picked the
would
most
like to
tricky
5.
ones.
I would like to bring it to 5 only.
Okay.
The question is that you take the case of SCCP.
G.
The Musharraf times, the commissioners were there. They were working. All posts were filled in. The people were working. They were relatively independent. Some of the policies we totally disagree on the other side of the table.
Which
but
ones?
At least.
Shabbar Saab, which ones did you disagree with?
Ji?
Which ones did you disagree with?
Sorry, ma'am.
Which policies did you disagree with?
No,
in
what
that
I'm saying, that, for example, let me give an example. In the SCCP case, the SCCP is a combination of they took DFI in SCCP and insurance in SCCP, and they merged the regular stock exchange with the corporate law body. I said now the SCCP has become too big.
Yeah.
DFIs should not be, in my personal view, should not be in SCCP. They should be with the State Bank of Pakistan.
And
so that was, my view is the wrong policy.
Now, moving ahead from those 8 years where you had reservations, you had good options as well. Masood Saab, if I was to come to you, what followed was we were promised democracy, and 2008 the Zardari government comes in place that has 3 finance ministers. So let's talk a little bit about that consistency and the orientation at that time. What do you think? Because they came in with big promises. They spoke about the government should not be in the business of running businesses. They have become white elephants. Each one of their finance ministers made the same claim. What did we achieve in those 5 years?
Basic point here. What we are talking today, I think one has to be very clear what governance actually is, basically. And the point which was made that they were actually, it's not only the military government or the civilian government, it was only the era or the period or a short periods where the relatively governance was a little better in case of certain institutions. Those institutions performed better and those institutions were doing the better work. But in case of the situation where, for example, one is saying that the 3 finance ministers came and they did not actually fulfill the objective or the commitment which they made to the stakeholders or the shareholder. It's very clear, basically. The important problem was that every one of the minister, basically, is being involved with its own priorities which are set up by their leadership in a different context, basically. If the priorities were set right and the things were done in that situation, because one thing you'll have to remember, our country has got the strongest lobbies other than US, basically. The strongest lobbies who operate in the strongest
For
lobbies.
us or against us, sir?
The strongest lobbies. For example, any simple thing will go up to the level of the Prime Minister and one lobby will go and forward it to him, and if he's convinced, it's done. If he's convinced it is done, the process should have been that if something is raised, that passes through a technical evaluation or a review by the relevant department, and if pluses and minuses are brought out, and then you take the decision.
So what you're saying is whoever has the officer's ear get his thing passed.
Yes, and it's happening all through. It has been happening all through, because what we required to have was the equity, what we required to have the more transparency. I mean, by default, we have got a media.
So Masood Saab, that brings me to a very important question which I feel everybody in this room must be thinking about. We're all Karachiites, we earn our living in this city which unfortunately has been sliding. So when you say that Karachi is the nerve center for Pakistan and we run the economy, so by the hypothesis that you've presented, some of the people in this city directly have the ear of the Prime Minister. Then what has happened to Karachi since the last 10 years? Dr. Saab, if I may come to you. In 2007, Benazir Bhutto gets assassinated, and since then, that ushers the dark stages for the city. 10 years fast forward.